Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. Karen sighed dramatically. You're so tense. You really should try yoga or something. She leaned against the door frame, sipping from yet another iced coffee like she had all the time in the world. It's just a car. You always make such a big deal out of these things. I clenched my jaw so hard I was surprised my teeth didn't crack. Karen, move the car. Oh, what? She said, tilting her head with a smirk. I held up my phone. I start filing complaints with the city, with the HOA, with anyone who will listen. I've got pictures, timestamps, and an entire folder labeled Karen's parking crimes. You want to see how serious I am? For the first time, her confidence wavered. She bit the inside of her cheek, clearly calculating whether I was bluffing. And I wasn't, not even a little. She huffed and pushed off the door frame. Fine, but you really need to chill out. I watched as she walked. No, sauntered to her car, moving as slowly as humanly possible. She unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirrors, checked her phone, took another sip of her drink, and finally backed out of my driveway. She didn't even park in her own driveway. No, she just moved the car a few feet down the road like that somehow fixed the problem. As I got into my own car, my blood was boiling. This wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to change. And if I didn't do something drastic, I was going to spend every morning of my life dealing with this same ridiculous routine. By the time I got to work, I had made up my mind. If she wanted a war, I was more than happy to give her one. The next few days, I started gathering more evidence. Every single time her car was in front of my driveway, I took pictures. I recorded video. I even set up a small security camera facing the street, capturing every moment of her car, sitting there like an immovable roadblock. But Karen wasn't just being a menace to me. Oh no. I started noticing that she did this to other people too. One morning, I caught her blocking a mail truck. The driver honked for nearly 5 minutes before she casually strolled out of her house, like she wasn't holding up an entire neighborhood's worth of mail. Another time, she parked so close to a fire hydrant that even a dog would have struggled to pee on it. But the real kicker? The day she blocked an ambulance. It happened in the afternoon. I was working from home when I heard sirens approaching. I looked outside and saw an ambulance trying to get down her street, but that was Karen's red SUV, perfectly positioned to make it impossible for them to get through. The driver honked. The paramedics got out looking around in frustration. One of them actually started knocking on doors, trying to find the idiot responsible. And where was Karen? Inside, completely unaware or pretending to be. It took 10 whole minutes before she finally came outside, looking absolutely put out, as if she were being inconvenienced instead of literally blocking a medical emergency. She moved her car with an attitude, rolling her eyes like she was the victim. The moment I knew she wasn't just inconsiderate, she was dangerous and needed to be dealt with. I uploaded the video footage of her blocking the ambulance onto a community forum. Within an hour, it had blown up. People were furious. Turns out Karen had been terrorizing this neighborhood for a long time, blocking people's driveways, taking up 2 parking spots, and parking in front of other people's houses instead of using her own driveway. It was a pattern. I scrolled through the comments, watching as the entire neighborhood turned against her in real time. Someone suggested calling the city to report her. Another person mentioned filing official complaints. But my favorite comment was when someone said, "Next time she blocks your driveway, just tow the damn car." I stared at those words for a long time. Tow the car. That was exactly what I was going to do. It was time. Karen had pushed her luck for too long, and I had reached my breaking point. The moment I saw her bright red SUV blocking my driveway yet again, I didn't hesitate. No more warnings, no more arguments, no more begging her to act like a decent human being. I was done. I pulled out my phone, found the number of a local towing company, and made the call. The dispatcher on the other end sounded professional, almost uninterested, as if this kind of thing happened all the time. "You're the property owner?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my pulse quickening. "And this car has been blocking my driveway repeatedly. I have pictures, timestamps, and video footage if needed." "That won't be necessary," she replied. "If it's blocking your driveway, you have every right to have it towed. We'll send a truck over in the next 30 minutes. 30 minutes. That was all it would take to finally rid myself of this headache. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching Karen's SUV like it was a villain about to meet its demise in the final act of a movie. Every second felt longer than the last. My heart pounded as I imagined what her reaction would be. Would she scream? Would she try to argue with the tow truck driver? Would she call the cops? I didn't care anymore. She had played her games for too long, and now it was my turn. The rumble of the tow truck was the most satisfying sound I had heard in months. It turned onto my street, its massive metal arm ready for action. The driver, a middle-aged man with a beard and no-nonsense attitude, stepped out and gave me a nod. "This the car?" he asked, already reaching for the controls. I nodded. "That's the one." He wasted no time. The mechanical arm extended, hooking under the front tires. The truck let out a deep whirring noise as it lifted Karen's SUV slightly off the ground. The back wheels still touched the pavement, but it was already halfway to being hauled away. My adrenaline surged. This was happening. This was actually happening. Then, right on cue, I heard the sound I had been expecting, a loud, high-pitched shriek cut through the air. Karen had emerged from her house wearing leggings and an oversized sweatshirt. Her hair in a messy bun looked more enraged than I had ever seen her. "What the hell is going on?" she screamed, running back across her lawn. "What do you think you're doing?" The tow truck driver barely glanced at her, towing an illegally parked vehicle. Her face turned red as she whirled on me, her expression wild with fury. "You called a tow truck on my car." I shrugged, doing my best to look calm, even though my heart was pounding. "I warned you, Karen," over and over again. "You didn't listen." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out at first. Then she let out an angry, breathy laugh. "You're insane. You can't just tow my car." The tow truck driver, clearly unimpressed, pointed at the sign across the street. "Actually, he can. Blocking a driveway is a towable offense. You could take it up with the impound lot." Karen turned back to me, eyes blazing. "Undo this right now." I shook my head. "Not happening." She stomped her foot like an overgrown toddler. "You're going to pay for this. You don't know who you're messing with." I crossed my arms. "I think I do. I'm messing with a woman who has been making my life miserable for weeks, and now I'm done." It was a morning that should have gone smoothly, but fate, or rather, Karen, had other plans. I threw on my blazer, grabbed my coffee, and stepped outside, ready to jump into my car for a career-defining meeting. But the second my foot hit the pavement, my heart dropped. There was again that same bright red SUV parked smack dab in front of my driveway, blocking me in like a fortress gate. My hands clenched into fists. I had exactly 20 minutes to get across town, and instead of heading to my meeting, I was standing there staring at a monument to pure entitlement. I marched up to the car, hoping, praying that maybe, just maybe, Karen had left her number on the dashboard. Nope, of course not. I knocked on the hood like a man on the edge of sanity. Nothing. I even tried pushing the car, just in case the universe had finally gifted me superhuman strength fueled by pure rage. Still nothing. The only thing that moved was my blood pressure. Desperation took over. I ran up to her house and pounded on the door. No answer. Again, no answer. I was one knock away from breaking federal noise pollution laws when finally it swung open, and there stood Karen in all her glory, robe, slippers, and untouched iced coffee in hand, like she had all the time in the world. Her expression was mildly annoyed, as if I was some door-to-door salesman interrupting her precious morning. "Can I help you?" she said, her voice dripping with faux politeness. I gestured wildly toward my blocked driveway. "Your car." Again. "I have a meeting in." I glanced at my watch. 15 minutes. "I need to leave right now." Karen took a long, agonizingly slow sip of her coffee, then glanced at her car as if she was seeing it for the first time. "Oh, that? Yeah, I was in a rush last night. Didn't feel like parking in my driveway." "You'll be fine. Just wait a little." I blinked, my brain short-circuited. "Wait? Wait for what?" "You to finish your coffee." At the speed of continental drift, "Karen, I need you to move it now." She sighed dramatically, like I had asked her to move a mountain instead of a vehicle she owned. "Oh, it's just a car. Why are you always so uptight? You should try meditating." I took a deep breath because the alternative was something that would land me in jail. Move the car. She waved me off like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. I'll get to it in a bit. I just sat down. You're making a big deal out of nothing. A big deal? My job was on the line, and this woman wanted to finish lounging like a discount Bond villain before doing the bare minimum. My jaw clenched so hard I could have cracked a walnut. I knew there was no reasoning with her, not when she was in maximum Karen mode. So I did what any desperate, sleep-deprived man rapidly losing his mind would do. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling a tow truck. For the first time, her smug expression cracked. You wouldn't. I tapped the screen, and suddenly she was wide awake. Oh my God, you're serious. She scrambled past me, practically tripping over her own slippers. She reached the car and fumbled for her keys. I saw her hands shake slightly, which would have been satisfying if I wasn't already 10 minutes late. She yanked open the door, huffed like I had personally ruined her morning, and finally reversed out of my driveway. The second she was gone, I jumped into my car and peeled out like I was in a Fast and Furious audition. The meeting barely made it, but I sat there the entire time seething because I just knew this wasn't the last time Karen would pull this stunt. And I was right. The next morning, there was again the same red SUV proudly blocking my driveway like it paid rent. It was almost impressive how brazen she was. I stood in silence for a moment, staring at the car, thinking maybe I was hallucinating from stress. But no, this was real life, and this time I wasn't going to let it slide. I stomped back to her house, rage fueling every step. When she opened the door, she was already smirking. She knew exactly why I was here. Morning, she said cheerfully, stretching like she'd had the best sleep of her life. Something wrong? I stared at her, trying to find words that didn't include profanity. Are you actually serious? You did it again. She shrugged. Oh, I was just so exhausted last night. You wouldn't understand. Long day, you know how it is. I didn't know how it was because, unlike her, I wasn't actively trying to become the human embodiment of a headache. Karen, I said, my voice dangerously low, you can't just park wherever you feel like it. She laughed. Sure I can. Who's going to stop me? You. She waggled her fingers in mock fear. Who's scary? I pulled out my phone again, my last shred of patience dangling by a thread. Last warning, tow truck. I mean it. Her smirk dropped so fast it could have set a world record. Okay, geez, calm down, she muttered, rolling her eyes. She disappeared inside and took her sweet time grabbing her keys before finally moving her car. But I had had enough. This wasn't going to stop unless I made it stop. So, as I drove off that morning, I decided no more warnings. Next time, I was towing that car, and she was going to pay. The next morning, I was half expecting it. I stepped out of my house, coffee in hand, feeling that strange mix of irritation and anticipation. And sure enough, there it was. Karen's bright red SUV sat in front of my driveway like a smug, immovable boulder. At this point, it wasn't even surprising. It was just routine. My jaw tightened as I stared at the car, steam practically rolling off me. Did she think this was funny? Was this some kind of weird power move? I could already hear her voice in my head, dismissing me, laughing at the inconvenience, like my time meant absolutely nothing. I stood there for a moment, debating my options. Calling the police? Useless. I'd already looked up the local parking laws, and as annoying as this was, it didn't technically count as an emergency. If I call them, they would likely just tell me to talk to her like I hadn't already tried that 100 times. The HOA? Even worse. They were practically Karen's fan club, a neighborhood dictatorship that only enforced rules when it benefited them. No, if I wanted this to stop, I had to do something different, something Karen wouldn't expect. I pulled out my phone and started snapping pictures, front, back, side, angles, timestamps included. If this ever went to court or escalated to something more official, I needed evidence. I wasn't just dealing with an inconsiderate neighbor. This was war. After taking enough pictures to build an entire legal case, I made my way to her door and knocked hard. No more polite taps, no more waiting around. It took a few seconds, but eventually, the door creaked open, and there she was, same smug expression, same infuriating smile. It was as if she had been waiting for me. Oh, good morning again, she said sweetly, stretching her arms. What brings you here? I exhaled slowly, my fingers itching to throw my coffee straight at her. Karen, your car is blocking my driveway again. She blinked innocently, peering past me. Oh wow, would you look at that? Crazy how that keeps happening. This was a game to her. She wasn't even pretending to be oblivious. No, she knew exactly what she was doing, and she was enjoying it. Move it, I said firmly, my patience stretched thin. The tow truck let out another warning sound as the SUV was lifted completely off the ground. Karen gasped, as if she had just watched someone rip out a part of her soul. She turned to the driver, switching tactics. Wait, please. Can't you just put it down? I'll move it right now. The driver, clearly tired of dealing with people like her, said, Sorry, once it's on the truck, it's going to the lot. You'll have to pay the fine to get it back. Karen's hands clenched into fists. Fine. How much? The driver gave her a number that made her eyes widen in horror. The combination of the towing fee, impound charges, and an additional city fine added up to several hundred. Karen's face twisted into something between a snarl and a whimper. This is rubbery, she screeched. You're all crooks. The driver didn't respond. He simply climbed into the truck, gave me a nod, and started driving away. Karen stood frozen, watching as her beloved SUV disappeared down the street, tossed away like a piece of trash. The silence that followed was almost comical. She turned back to me, her breathing heavy. You think you won? She spat. I smirked. I know I did. She stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard that it rattled the windows. I let out a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. It was over, finally, truly over. Oh, so I thought. The next day, Karen was back with a vengeance. Her car might have been sitting in an impound lot, but that didn't mean she was going to let this go. She spread rumors around the neighborhood, telling people I was a vindictive psycho who got her car towed for no reason. She exaggerated the story to make herself seem like the victim, claiming I was out to get her. Some people bought into her nonsense, but most of the neighbors had seen her antics firsthand. They knew exactly what kind of person she was. Still, she wasn't done. She tried to file a complaint against me with the HOA, but it backfired spectacularly. The moment she brought my name up, I showed the HOA president the mountain of evidence I had collected, photos, videos, even the security camera footage of her blocking the ambulance. The HOA had no choice but to drop the complaint. And just like that, Karen's last desperate attempt to punish me crumbled. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen had one more trick up her sleeve. A few days later, I walked outside to find something unbelievable spray painted in big, bold letters across my driveway. Petty jerk. I stood there, staring at the graffiti, my anger simmering. I knew immediately who was responsible. There was only one person in this neighborhood immature enough to pull a stunt like this. I took out my phone, snapped some pictures, and called the police. They showed up within the hour, took one look at the graffiti, and immediately walked over to Karen's house. She answered the door looking smug, as if she was expecting this, as if she had already planned out the entire conversation in her head. But when the officer asked her about the graffiti, she made a crucial mistake. She tried to play innocent, but got too defensive too quickly. The officer wasn't buying it, and when I showed them the footage from my security camera, which caught her red-handed, that was it. Karen was slapped with a vandalism charge. The look on her face when they handed her the ticket was priceless. As she fumed, I leaned in slightly and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "Looks like you're the one paying fines now." She stormed back into her house without another word, and that was the moment I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I had won. For a few glorious days, everything was peaceful. Karen had been humiliated, Ted fined and put in her place. Her car was no longer blocking my driveway. Her childish stunts had backfired, and the neighborhood finally seemed to be rid of her nonsense. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to take a loss gracefully. She was the type to obsess over it, to let the humiliation fester until she came up with another scheme. And I was right. It started small. Petty things. My trash bins mysteriously went missing the night before garbage collection. My mailbox was stuffed so full of random junk mail and flyers that it almost broke the hinges, and someone left dog poop right in front of my doorstep. Not in a plastic bag, just dumped there as if a dog had been trained to target my property. I had no proof, but I didn't need it. This had Karen written all over it. I ignored it at first. I wasn't about to stoop to her level. But then she started involving other people. She spread rumors around the neighborhood, twisting the story of the tow truck incident to make me look like some kind of vindictive monster. According to Karen's version of events, I had her car towed without warning because I was bored and wanted to flex my power. She made it sound like I had some personal vendetta against her, when in reality, she had been pushing me to the brink for weeks. At first, no one took her seriously. Everyone had seen her antics firsthand, and most of them didn't trust a word she said. But Karen was persistent. She charmed the older residents, the ones who didn't have security cameras or social media, and slowly she started building a small army of supporters. It was like watching a cult form in real time. One afternoon, I was watering my lawn when one of my neighbors, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, walked by and gave me a nasty glare. This was the same woman who used to offer me cookies during the holidays, who used to wave whenever she saw me. But now she clutched her purse like I was about to snatch it and muttered, "Shame on you." I stared after her, completely baffled. A few minutes later, another neighbor, Mr. Harris, walked by and shook his head disapprovingly. "She told us what you did," he said, his voice dripping with judgment. I frowned. "Who?" "Karen." "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "Towing someone's car without talking to them first? That's low." I let out a bitter laugh. "Are you serious?" I gave her dozens of warnings. She knew exactly what she was doing. "That's not what she said," he replied before walking away. I was seething. This woman was actively turning the neighborhood against me, painting herself as the victim when all I did was enforce the bare minimum of human decency. And worst of all, some people were actually buying it. I needed a way to shut this down once and for all. Ignoring her wasn't working, and confronting her would only feed into her drama. So I did what any logical person would do. I started digging. Karen had lived in the neighborhood for years longer than me, and she had connections. But people like her always had skeletons in their closet. I just needed to find them. I needed to find them. It didn't take long. A simple public records search turned up something very interesting. A few years back, Karen had been cited multiple times for violating HOA rules. Parking violations, unauthorized modifications to her house, and most interestingly, misuse of HOA funds. That last one caught my attention. I dug deeper, and sure enough, there were whispers of a financial scandal involving the HOA, where funds mysteriously went missing under Karen's leadership. I wasn't the only one who had suffered at the hands of Karen's entitlement. She had made a lot of enemies over the years, people who had been too afraid to speak up or too exhausted to fight back. But now, they had a reason to talk. I reached out to a few neighbors privately. Some of them hesitated at first, but when I mentioned Karen's financial misconduct, they were more than willing to share their stories. One neighbor, a quiet man named Jake, told me how Karen had once tried to fine him for parking in his own driveway because she claimed it was an eyesore. Another woman, Mrs. Patel, revealed that Karen had pressured her into paying a bogus HOA fee that didn't exist. And then there was the kicker, a former HOA board member who admitted that Karen had once used HOA money to pay for personal landscaping services. I had everything I needed. Instead of confronting Karen directly, I took a different approach. I compiled all the evidence, HOA violations, witness statements, the financial discrepancies, and sent it to someone who could actually do something about it, the city. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Within a few days, an official investigation was launched into Karen's activities, and just like that, the tides turned. The same people who had been giving me dirty looks suddenly avoided eye contact with Karen. The small army she had built started falling apart one by one as the truth came out. Then came the HOA meeting. It was packed. More people showed up than ever before. Karen walked in with forced confidence, acting as if nothing was wrong. But the second the meeting started, it was clear she was in trouble. The HOA board members, the same people who had ignored my complaints before, were now on edge. The financial investigation had unearthed irregularities in the HOA's records, and Karen was at the center of it. Neighbors stood up one after another, airing their grievances, people she had bullied, fined, and manipulated. By the time it was my turn to speak, there wasn't much left to say. I think it's clear what's happening here, I said, looking around. Karen's been getting away with things for far too long, but not anymore. Karen sat there, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. For once, she didn't have a comeback. Then came the final blow. The HOA president, clearly done with her nonsense, made the announcement. Effective immediately, Karen is removed from her position on the board. Furthermore, due to the pending investigation, she is barred from any leadership role within the HOA. The room erupted into murmurs. Some people clapped. Karen stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair, her face red with humiliation. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "This is my neighborhood." "No, Karen," the president said. "It's everyone's neighborhood." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. And just like that, the reign of Karen was over. For the first time in what felt like forever, the neighborhood felt peaceful. Karen was no longer on the HOA board, no longer throwing around her fake authority, and most importantly, no longer blocking my driveway. It was as if the entire street had taken a deep breath, exhaled, and finally relaxed. People who used to avoid eye contact now waved when I passed by. The same neighbors who had believed Karen's twisted version of events were suddenly polite, if not outright apologetic. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that they had been duped, and now that the truth was out, the balance had been restored. But Karen wasn't gone. Not yet. She had lost her power, her influence, and a good chunk of her dignity, but she was still in the neighborhood. And if there was one thing I had learned about her, it was that she didn't know how to let things go. After her humiliating exit from the HOA meeting, she went quiet for a while. No smug comments, no fake pleasantries, nothing. It was unsettling. Karen wasn't the type to retreat without a plan, which meant she was plotting something. And she proved me right a week later. It started with a letter taped to my door. No envelope, no return address, just a single sheet of paper with a message written in red ink. It read, "You may have won this round, but I promise you I will make your life miserable. Enjoy your little victory while it lasts." I stared at it, half amused, half annoyed. This was so Karen, dramatic, vaguely threatening, but ultimately pathetic. I knew she was trying to get under my skin, but at this point I was immune. If this was the best she could do, she was even more desperate than I thought. A few days later, the petty sabotage began. My sprinklers mysteriously stopped working. My trash bins kept getting knocked over, and someone had clearly gone through my mail, leaving opened envelopes scattered on the ground. It was laughable how predictable she was. One night, I heard a noise outside around midnight. I looked through the window and saw a shadowy figure creeping toward my driveway. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. I quickly grabbed my phone and hit record. The grainy video captured Karen crouching next to my tires, holding what looked like a screwdriver. She was so focused on whatever she was doing that she didn't even notice the security camera mounted above her head, recording everything in perfect high definition. I didn't stop her. I let her finish, let her think she had gotten away with it. Then the next morning, I uploaded the footage to the neighborhood forum. The reaction was immediate. People were furious. Whatever sympathy Karen had left evaporated overnight. The president called an emergency meeting to discuss recent acts of vandalism. Before Karen could try to spin another story, the security footage played on a big screen for everyone to see. She was caught red-handed. I expected her to deny it, to pull another dramatic performance. But even she knew there was no talking her way out of this. The evidence was too clear. The room was silent as everyone turned to look at her. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. A police officer who had been invited to the meeting cleared his throat. "You do realize tampering with someone's vehicle is a crime, right?" Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. "You could be facing serious charges," the officer continued. "I suggest you come with us." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was music to my ears. Karen let out a string of protests, but no one was listening anymore. The people who had once defended her, who had believed her lies, were suddenly very, very quiet. As I led her outside, she turned back to glare at me. "This isn't over," she hissed. I just smiled. "Yes, it is," and this time I knew it was true. Karen was charged with vandalism and harassment, and while she didn't spend much time in jail, The legal fees alone were enough to make her life miserable. But the best part? She was forced to sell her house. The mounting complaints, the bad reputation, the HOA fines, it all became too much. Within a month, there was a for sale sign in front of her house. The day she packed up and left was the most satisfying moment of my life. I watched from my porch as the moving truck pulled away, Karen sitting in the passenger seat, scowling out the window. She didn't wave, neither did I. The neighborhood felt lighter after she was gone. People started chatting more, organizing block parties, actually enjoying their homes again. It was like we had all been living under a dark cloud without realizing it. And now that the storm had passed, the sun had finally come out. One evening, as I was enjoying a cold drink on my porch, my new neighbor walked up to introduce himself, a friendly-looking man in his 40s with a wife and 2 kids. "We just moved in," he said with a grin. The old owner didn't leave much behind, but she did leave one thing. He handed me a small, crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it and nearly burst out laughing. It was another note from Karen, scribbled hastily. "You may have won this battle, but mark my words, I will have the last laugh." I smirked and tossed the note into the trash. Karen could believe whatever she wanted, but the truth was simple. I had already won.